Many parents will say that when they're on the drive out the gates of Barretstown, the conversation with their children is, when can we come back? Why do we have to leave? This is better than Disney World. And the teenagers want to know how quick I can come back, what age I need to be to become a volunteer at Barretstown, and then when I'm old enough, can I work in Barretstown? And
that's Dee Ahearn, bringing serious fun to seriously ill kids at Ireland's magical Barretstown. And I'm John Lee.
Agus Misha Martin Nutty. Welcome to another episode of Irish Stew. Agus Nullig Chunagwit.
Hi everybody, this is Martin Nutty and welcome to the Irish Stew podcast. And today we are recording from a new location, courtesy of Bank of Ireland. We are on the 44th floor of the Grand Central Tower, looking out on a beautiful, crisp December day in New York City, a view of skyscrapers, and down below us, if you could hear, there are bells ringing because this time of the year is holiday season, and that means it is also giving season. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, John Lee, who will tell us about our guest.
Thank you, Martin, for setting the stage here. Yes, holiday season, and we thought we could use a tale, a story that, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, speaks to the better angels of our nature. And with that spirit, we look forward to learning about a magical place called Barretstown from its CEO, Dee Ahearn. Welcome, Dee.
good morning.
Give us a quick capsule summary of what Barretstown is, and then we'll get into much more detail as we go.
So Barretstown is indeed a truly magical place, a 500-acre estate based in Ballymore Eustace in County Kildare. And it is from there that we provide therapeutic programs for children and families who've been affected by cancer and other serious illness. And children travel from the US, they travel from across Europe and indeed Ireland to attend this magical place.
Dee, I know you've been there since 2010. You've made a lot of changes and had a lot of growth in the organization, but let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say the Irish Stew Global Charitable Foundation was able to dip into its deep coffers and provide you with twice the annual budget you have now. What would Barretstown be doing?
Wouldn't that be absolutely fantastic? And let's have a conversation about that. Definitely it would be amazing. At the moment, we're just about keeping up with the demand for our programs. This year alone at Barretstown, we're going to serve over 19,000 campers. So far, since we were founded in 1994, we have served over 125,000 campers. And we know that by the end of this decade, that number is going to be 250,000 campers. So yes, we need to raise more funds. And this is why we've established Barretstown Foundation USA. Every year we have to raise over €9 million to be able to deliver our programs, and we just receive 4% of that funding from the Irish government. So this is why initiatives in the US and across Europe and indeed in Ireland are very important to allow us to meet that growing demand for our programs.
So we're going to obviously ask lots of questions about Barretstown, but what we find sometimes helpful is to understand from our guests a little bit about their origin story. So tell us about you.
Yeah, I'm from Tipperary. I'm a proud Tipperary woman, and I have lived in Kildare now for the last many years. I left school, I went to the Convent of Mercy in Care and really didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I decided that marketing was the up and coming buzzword at the time and thought, yes, I'll pursue a career in marketing, and I moved to London. It was that or Australia, and my mother was pleading with me not to go to Australia because it wasn't as easy to get home if I got homesick, and I had been to boarding school and got very homesick. Went to London and I sent my CV off, which was a very light CV at the time, off to a number of marketing agencies in London. I decided I wanted to work in an agency because I thought that would be cool. Got to work on lots of different brands, and I was very lucky actually that I received a call from a company called AMA Marketing and Promotions, and they invited me to join them, and that was an amazing experience for me. I went from a junior account executive to an account director working on fabulous brands for Procter & Gamble and Pernod Ricard and other really great brands like that. So it was great marketing experience, and it was everything I thought it was going to be. And then unfortunately in 1989 my mother passed away, and she had been one of those people who had received the anti-D blood transfusion, and so got very ill very quickly and unfortunately passed away. And then I found myself the eldest of three, travelling home from London every other weekend, and decided I needed to get the CV out again and dust it off and send it to a number of agencies in Dublin. And I was very lucky. I was asked to travel across to Dublin to attend an interview with Black & Decker. Now, I knew nothing about power tools. I can still claim that I know nothing about power tools, but I reasoned that if I did my research and I put my best foot forward, I could probably get this job, and I'm glad to say that I did. And I learned very quickly everything there was to know about power tools, and stayed with them for a number of years, and then I was headhunted to go into the property sector. So I worked for the Gun Group and CBRE and spent a number of years there, and one of my clients at the time was Treasury Holdings. And after about 5 or 6 years, 8 years in fact, I was asked if I would consider joining the board of Treasury Holdings and going to join them as their international sales and marketing director. So I did. I took that leap of faith. And
so just to jump in, we're often always interested to hear about people, their experiences not being in Ireland. So you had the London experience, and it sounds like in this property sector you had quite an international experience. Could you tell us about how that may have broadened your viewpoints, or also how your Irishness played into your success abroad?
I definitely think, being Irish, I think we have this ability to talk, and it's all about relationships and building relationships and getting to understand. I think we're very good at getting to understand what the other party involved in the conversation wants to get out of it. And when I was in Treasury Holdings, certainly that was a roller coaster. I think in my first 5 weeks within the organisation, I was dispatched to China. And my task was to come up with a market entry strategy for a mixed-use residential and retail development on Chongming Island. And so that was very interesting. And again, the cultures are totally different. And in actual fact, one of the things that was a shock to me was that the female voice around the table wasn't as well considered or thought of as it might have been back in Dublin or back in London. So that took a lot of building relationships and gaining trust. And we were working with the Shanghai government at the time, and it was really interesting, but it just took that little bit longer to achieve ultimately what I wanted to achieve. And then I was approached one day by Danuta Gray, who was the CEO of O2 in Ireland at the time. And Danuta asked me, because when I was in Treasury Holdings, I was involved with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was chairperson of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and I could really see firsthand the impact that corporates could have on a not-for-profit organisation, not just in terms of the funds that they could raise, but their skills and their expertise and their advice and their guidance. And Danuta called me and she said, look, Dee, Barretstown needs a new CEO. Would you consider putting your hat into the ring? And she said that she wanted somebody that had that blend of not-for-profit experience, which I had through Make-A-Wish, but also my experience of being involved in the corporate sector and that business background. She explained at the time that Barretstown needed some help. It was a very challenging time for fundraising. Ireland was heading into a deep recession, and she needed somebody to go in there who could turn things around. And I took a leap of faith, and 14 years later I'm still at Barretstown. In fact, 14 years this November. I will be at Barretstown since 2010. So it was a great experience for me, but there was no doubt it was a major shock to the system as well. You were coming from sitting around a boardroom table where you had all of your colleagues involved in making big decisions to all of a sudden being the person who was making those decisions. And those decisions were having an impact on the lives of children and families affected by cancer and serious illness, as well as the team that were in Barretstown and the future of the organisation.
I'm sure as well as the roof was leaking and the boiler was blowing up or something along those lines.
Absolutely. It's a 500-acre estate. It's absolutely magnificent.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah. There were challenges with the infrastructure of the organisation. And also the demand for Barretstown's programmes was growing and growing. But yet they were at this stage where they were raising €4.5 million a year, and something needed to give. Something needed to change. And I can remember at the time, one of the first things that struck me was that 40% of the income was coming from corporates, and of that 40%, 70% was 3 corporate partners. Yeah. And I won't mention who those corporate partners were now, but their own businesses were changing at the time, and they weren't going to be able to sustain that level of support for Barretstown. Yeah, there was definitely work to do, and it was definitely challenging. I think it was probably about 2 years before the ship started to turn and we started to see some success. But it all came back to relationships and building relationships. And I can safely say that I relied very heavily on my own network, the network that I'd built up over many years to help me and to allow me to make the changes that I needed to make at Barretstown.
So I imagine you talk about when you arrived in 2010 as a pivot point. Economically, things are not good in Ireland. Paul Newman, who is one of the founder, as I understand, of Barretstown, has just passed away a few years ago. Not to be crass, but you've lost a little bit of star power in that situation. Talk to us about the importance of getting well-known faces as advocates for what you do.
Yes, that is very important, and unfortunately I never had the opportunity to meet Paul Newman. As you say, he had passed away in 2008. We're very fortunate though that Barretstown is a member of the global organisation called the Serious Fun Children's Network, and they've got 30 camps and programmes globally around the world. And Paul's youngest daughter, Clea, is an ambassador for the organisation. And by ambassador, I mean she's been a great support to Barretstown. Over those years, we've celebrated key milestones like our 20th anniversary, our 25th anniversary, and only this year we celebrated our 30th anniversary. And Clea has been with us on that journey and been very positively disposed towards Barretstown, and it also helps that she looks just like her dad, and she speaks with passion when she speaks about Barretstown, and Paul Newman loved Barretstown. He really did. He spent a lot of time in Ireland, and a lot of time when he came to Ireland first, he was introduced to some very key people like Tony O'Reilly and Chris O'Reilly, and they were very supportive of Paul, so they were able to open a lot of doors for Paul back then. But I suppose fast forwarding 30 years, yes, we do rely very heavily on our ambassadors, and they're a great asset to us in terms of helping us to open doors and raise awareness of the organisation. And we're very fortunate to work with some great ambassadors. Barry Keoghan, you all know the wonderful Irish actor, does a lot of stuff for us. In the past we've had Jonathan Rhys-Myers and Aidan Gillen. The Edge was with us recently. Yes, The Edge came down and he recently opened our new medical facility at Barretstown, and all of that helps. It paves the way for other people to want to be involved. And I think what stands Barretstown in very good stead as well is that our governance, we're a very highly governed organisation, and in fact this year we picked up a number of awards for our governance, and we recently won the Published Accounts Awards and the Good Governance Awards, and I think that gives people a lot of comfort, especially given Ireland's been through a number of charity sector scandals where, and you know, firmly believe a lot of great people doing great work but maybe just didn't have the supports that they needed around the areas of governance. So I think Barretstown's track record in that space is very important, and it does encourage people to become involved at Barretstown. So in that sense we're very fortunate.
I've done some work in the nonprofit sector, and I found one thing is a sort of misconception that a certain kind of nonprofit would boast about 98% of our donations go immediately. We don't take anything from that. It just goes immediately into the kids or the whoever the target of their charity is. But it can be a bad sign that they're not taking care of the organization, bringing in the right talent, doing the governance work, and making a sustainable, long-lasting organization.
I totally agree with that. Barretstown is an organisation where we're recruiting 2,500 volunteers a year. We've got 120 staff at peak time. We've got a 500-acre facility. We've been able to invest €20 million in our facility over the last number of years. To do that, you have to do it right, and you need good people. You need people who are going to be responsible and accountable to join the organisation, and that's a challenge. Encouraging people to join the not-for-profit sector is a challenge, because they could walk into other organisations and receive bonuses, and they won't receive a bonus when they come and work in Barretstown, but that's just the way it is. But they get a lot of other things. I genuinely feel that I am very fortunate. I have the privilege of working with the most incredible team at Barretstown, and they do it because they love to see what we do. They love to see the look on the faces of the children and families who come to our gates, and they realise the huge difference that we're making in their lives during very traumatic times.
Let's just go quickly to what you said, the look of the families, because that's where I was going to, the kids and the families, that's where I was going to go next. What's it like when they show up and they look at this beautiful castle where they're going to spend the next week? And what's the difference in the way they look after a week?
Oh, that's a great question. When a child is diagnosed with serious illness, they're plunged into a world of hospitals, doctors, and often grueling treatment. And the reality of it is they have to grow up too quickly, and they lose out on a large part of their childhood. And that's where Barretstown comes in. Our therapeutic programs are designed to rebuild confidence, independence, and self-esteem. And To that very question, my favourite day at Barretstown is Departure Day, and it's not because I'm delighted to see the children going home, but it's because I see that look on their parents' faces when they arrive through the gates. They've dropped off their son or daughter a week beforehand, and I see it all the time. I see the children who come to Barretstown by themselves without their parents are 7 to 17 years of age, and I see the 7-year-olds are hanging on to their parents' legs. They don't want to let go. They don't know what to expect. They're shy and they're nervous. The teenagers are too cool for school. Why am I here? Why are my parents? Why is my consultant recommending that I come to this place? The outcome is the same at the end of the week for them all. They have all made the most incredible friendships. They realise that they're not defined by their illness, that there are other children on the same illness journey that they've been on. Many parents will say that when they're on the drive out the gates of Barretstown, the conversation with their children is, when can we come back? Why do we have to leave? This is better than Disney World. And the teenagers want to know how quick I can come back, what age I need to be become a volunteer at Barretstown. And then when I'm old enough, can I work in Barretstown? And we see that, like many of our staff every year are returning campers who've been through the programme and who just absolutely love Barretstown. It's in their DNA and they want to be back and they want to be part of it, even though they've aged out of camp. And like Barretstown is growing, it's an incredibly busy place. We start our programmes in January and we run right through to December, mid-December. And so during the weekends before the children get their summer holidays, we have 30 families coming through the gates of Barretstown every weekend. So that's 30 families, they all have one thing in common, they all have a child who's got a serious illness. And that child is aged 0 to 17 years of age. Then, as I mentioned, during the summer, when the children have their summer holidays, we'll have 125 children come through our gates, and they will stay with us for 7 days, and then we'll take a 2-day break, and then the next group of children will come through. And in more recent times, we've introduced programs for 17 to 24-year-olds, because the feedback that we got from a lot of parents was, when a 20-year-old is diagnosed with a serious illness, they fall outside. They fall into adult services, they fall outside paediatric services, so there aren't as many supports for them there. So that's something that we've worked very hard on over the last number of years as well, and we run a number of camps per year.
Talk to us a little bit about the kind of activity schedule, let's say, for a too cool for school teenager.
Yeah.
What would that look like? What would be some of the things this young person would get involved in the course of the week that would make them excited by the end of the week?
So they'll arrive and it's a full-on schedule. We don't let those teenagers hang around too long and have too much free time on their hands. The one thing about Barretstown is they're not allowed to have their mobile phones, so there's no social media. There's no social media influence, and they get to immerse themselves fully in their activity. So they have a busy programme. They're up for breakfast at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then they're broken up into different activity groups, and that activity groups could see them on a climbing wall. We've got an indoor climbing wall, we've got an outdoor high ropes course, we've got archery, we've got canoeing, we've got a theatre, as you can imagine, because of our founder Paul Newman. We have a fabulous theatre where the children will perform on stage in their activity group. They'll put on a show, and that's actually a sight to behold, because in the theatre at any one time there's probably 250 people in the audience. So they're performing on a stage to a full packed theatre, and they get all the fun that goes with that as well. We've got a green room backstage and we've got costumes, so there's every single activity is planned. We've got an activity team who make sure that the children are challenged. And our model is challenge, success, reflection and discovery. So horse riding is a very good example. We might have a camper who's maybe never seen a horse before, is absolutely terrified of horses. And our counsellors will make sure that child is successful. It may be that they don't want to sit on the horse, or they don't want to get up on the horse, but they might want to pat the horse, or they might want to lead the horse around the arena with the support of some of the staff. And that's their challenge. So the staff will encourage them and to step outside the comfort zone and to take on that challenge. But as I said, it might just be leading the horse, or it might be getting up on the horse. And then that evening, they'll have what they call cottage chat in the cottage. And the counsellors will say to them, look at you, you were terrified of horses and you actually got on a horse today. So that's the children discovering that they can do things. And it's very important. And that's all of those steps help to rebuild that confidence, independence and self-esteem that the child has lost out on because of their illness. Because their illness treatment for cancer can last up to 4 years. So they're in and out of hospital quite a bit. They miss out on all of the things that their school friends or their friends, or life carries on for their friends, but life is put on pause for these children because of the social isolation that comes with being in hospital for long periods of time. At Barretstown, it's not about the sickness. And we do have a medical facility. You mentioned that the Edge came down and opened that up for us last week. So we have doctors and nurses on site. So a child could be on oral chemotherapy, but they can still come to Barretstown. Our nurses and our doctors don't look like nurses and not doctors. There's no white gowns or anything like that. They have their Barretstown hoodie or their Barretstown t-shirt. And if a child needs to take medication, we really don't bring them into the med shed unless they need to come to the med shed. We will go and find them, and it could be that just after their breakfast they're getting their medication in the dining hall, or it could be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon they're about to scale the high ropes course. That's when they get their medication. Nothing is designed to remind them of that hospital environment that they've left behind.
You got onto a little phrase there that I've picked up from your literature. Childhood stops for children affected by serious illness. At Barretstown, we press play on childhood.
Yes, that's it. As I mentioned there, everything is paused for that child. And because they lose out on a large part of their childhood, this is why our programs are so important. We do just that. We press play. We help them to regain that confidence, independence and self-esteem that they've lost because of the illness. And I can give you a great example as one of our campers who's since gone on to become a staff member, Carol. And when Carol was 9 years of age, she got a brain tumour. He was a very outgoing kid, playing lots of sport, but all of a sudden he was in hospital having very serious surgery. And he had a big scar on his head, so when he came home from hospital he refused to go out and play with his friends. He was very self-conscious, didn't want to just be involved, and just withdrew into himself. And his consultant had recommended that he come to Barretstown, and his mum said to me afterwards, she rang me afterwards, she said, I don't know what you did to my son, but he's out there now, the beanie hat is gone, he doesn't care. It's like a badge of honour now. And he just wants to know when he can come back to Barretstown again. And that's what everything, we call it serious fun, but of course there is a serious side to it. And everything we do is designed to press play on that childhood again.
Can I ask, how much unfulfilled demand is there within Ireland? And obviously globally it's massive,
Yeah.
but are you, technically could you service everything in Ireland? Are you big enough to do that? I'm guessing not.
It's very hard to tell how many sick children are in Ireland because there isn't any actual figures that say at this moment in time, but we've worked with the hospitals and the social workers, and we guesstimate that there's about 33,500 children in Ireland at any one moment in time who is affected by a serious illness. We will always prioritise. We allow the children to come back to Barretstown 3 times, so they can come to a family camp 3 times and they can come to summer camp 3 times. But after that we need to make way for the next children who are coming through, and we will work very closely with the hospitals. And they help us to identify those children. And quite often, unfortunately, we'll get a call from a consultant to say, look, we really feel that this family could benefit Barretstown, and we will always try and make that family a priority. But you're right, the demand is huge and it continues to grow. And this is why in 2012, we introduced our hospital outreach programs. So that's where we take Barretstown, outside the gates of Barretstown, into the hospital setting. So we bring the playful spirit of Barretstown into the hospital environment, and we're in the hospitals in Dublin, and we're in the hospitals in Cork, in Belfast, and we're also in University Hospitals London. And what we find is that we will go into the hospital setting and we'll meet a child who's just getting that diagnosis of serious illness. So we're able to help that child in the hospital setting, but we're also able to tell them about Barretstown. So encouraging the child to get well enough to come to Barretstown. And working with their parents on that journey so that they can transition to come to a residential camp. But also we'll find that we are in the hospital and we'll meet a child who's been to Barretstown and they've relapsed. And again, it's about helping that child to have some light at the end of the tunnel, something to look forward to, that they can come back to Barretstown as well. And earlier this year we launched our programs in the community and education programs. We were always doing education programs. This is something that we introduced over the last number of years where we're in schools. So quite often I mentioned that a child could undergo treatment that can last a number of years. For those children, transitioning back into the school can be very challenging because bear in mind, they might have lost their hair, they might have a Hickman line to allow them to receive their treatment, they might have a prosthetic limb. And for that child, transitioning back into their classroom can be very challenging. So the programme in the school is designed not to spotlight that particular child, but actually we have these puppets who can talk about serious illness in a child-friendly manner. And they talk about the Hickman line, they talk about having no hair, conversations like, I have leukemia, but you can't catch leukemia if you sit beside me. And quite often we will have the puppets in the classroom and the child who's been to Barretstown will put their hand up at the back of the classroom and say, I was there, it was brilliant. So it's not about the child, but it's about explaining the journey that the child has been on. and explaining what Barretstown is, so that when they're telling their friends about Barretstown, they're able to understand what Barretstown is. And this year we've introduced programs in the homes or in the community, and that's very important as well, because unfortunately the outcome for all children is not going to be positive. You're right, thanks to advances in modern medicine, now over 80% of children will go on to make a full recovery, but that's not always the case for some children, unfortunately. And some of these families may have been to Barretstown, but now their child is just too sick. So we have a lasting memory making session that we do with the family, and we go out to their home and we bring Barretstown into their kitchen or their living room for a couple of hours, and it's a very special program.
Is this the bereavement program, or is that an aspect of it?
It's different. The bereavement program is a very important program at Barretstown as well, and our bereavement program is a 3-cycle program whereby, families who have unfortunately lost a child can come to Barretstown. For the first session, they'll arrive on Thursday and leave on Sunday. For their second session, they'll arrive on Friday, leave on Sunday, and their third. And we feel we need to be with that family for that cycle of 3. It's different from our family camps, because those families will come to the gates and they're broken. They're completely broken. And it affects the whole family, because bear in mind, the siblings have been passed on to aunts or uncles or grandparents or anybody who can look after them, and all of the focus has been on the sick child. And genuinely, I've heard the most heartbreaking things said to me by siblings of a child who's passed away, because they say, if it had been me, maybe mum or dad wouldn't be so upset. Or the family feel guilty about smiling. Or the family don't take photographs because they took so many photographs before the child passed away, they can't bring themselves to take a photograph. One of the first things we do when they arrive at Barretstown is we take a photograph at the red door. And we have a brilliant counsellor that's part of our team who works with these families, and it's okay to laugh. It doesn't mean you've moved on, it doesn't mean you've forgotten. It's okay to have fun. But that's a very special programme for Barretstown.
To share a personal note, I had a sister who died from cystic fibrosis when I guess she would have been, first grade. I can't remember the ages, but so she would have been 3 years younger. Yeah,
so you can remember the impact that
Yeah, that whole kind of confusion for
a
kid, and not this mix of what about me and guilty for thinking what about me.
Exactly, and that's why Barretstown's family camps are so important, because quite often it will be the first time that the family will all come together as a family, and each one of the children is as important as the sick child. Right. It's that holistic view of the family. And genuinely, I've had mothers tell me that this is the first time we've sat down and had a family meal together, because when they arrive into our dining hall, they're surrounded by love. Our carers look after their every need. Their food is brought to the table, it's served to them, and parents have said, listen, I've been in Dublin, my husband's been in Donegal minding the brothers and sisters, and we've been like ships passing in the night. And that's why the programme is so important.
So talk to us about other aspects of the family. The bereavement programme, I can imagine, is very meaningful, as is bringing Barretstown to the homes of very sick children. But I imagine for a parent to drop off their sick child to Barretstown can at times be difficult. They can be fearful, they can be concerned. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I guess their decision to send the child to Barretstown has been influenced by the advice that they've gotten from the consultant in the hospital about the impact and the support it will be to their sick child. And we see it a lot. We see families who drop their child off and they're only dropped off an hour and the parents are ringing the med shed to find out, is everything okay? And I think after a couple of days they settle down. But what we often find is that the families themselves will want to come to Barretstown first. And that gives them great comfort, because they come as a family and they realise how professional Barretstown is, how safe it is, the medical support that's there, the doctors and nurses that are going to be there to look after their child when they're with Barretstown. But it is big. I have a 24-year-old now, and when she goes off somewhere I worry about her, so I can imagine what it's like to have a 7-year-old who's got a seriously ill child. But I think they take a lot of comfort, and there's no doubt when the children leave Barretstown and they've driven out that gate and they're full of, one of the things that we do for the children when they come to camp is that we have a scrapbook session. So the scrapbook session documents their days in Barretstown, everything they got up to, because more often than not, some parents will say to us, what did they do for the week? I asked them and they just said stuff. Don't get into the detail
they're
about
like
it.
other kid, right?
Yeah. So they're trying to draw the information out of them on the way home or when they get home. We now send them home in a scrapbook, which takes it day by day, everything that they've done, so that the parents can ask them probing questions about, well, what was this about? It is encouraging their child to talk. And genuinely, I meant this. We take their mobile phones off them so they can't be involved with social media for the week, and they've just got to engage with the program, and that's good for them as well.
So what's that withdrawal
It's
process like for some children? It's going to be tough for some of them, I
Yeah,
think,
absolutely tough. Mm-hmm. And actually, some parents would say, "Oh, keep your phone. I want to be able to ring it." Yeah. So that's the challenge. Yeah. Actually, listen, the teenagers, he'll have the phone handed in. That's the old phone, the old Nokia being handed in, and then you say to them, "This isn't your phone. It's your phone." But it's, yeah, they do try it on, but it's important.
Dee, it sounds we're hearing an agenda that's expanding beyond the 500 acres, and you're here in New York. And I'm trying to weave about 19 things in here. And I was also, my business is public relations, so I realized that the Edge and those folks are great for keeping headlines up there, keeping your story out there. But now you're here in the U.S. and you're working to tell the story. What's the importance of the United States, North America? Our biggest audience is North America. Our second biggest audience would be Ireland. But what's the message to North America about Barretstown?
That's a good question. We've set up Barretstown Foundation USA predominantly to raise funds here in the US. Historically, children have travelled since Paul Newman set up Barretstown in 1994. Children have travelled across the Atlantic every year to attend Barretstown, and it is very important. Culturally, it's very important as well. It's very important for the children to get to meet other nationalities when they're in Barretstown. And we send now at the moment 20 children a year to Barretstown from the US. And we know that the demand, we work with Kevin Curran in Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Kevin has been sending children. And I know from talking to Kevin that more and more children need to be able to experience Barretstown. He saw firsthand the children that he sends across every year and the impact that it has on them. So that's very important. We want to be able to get to a stage where we can fund 50 children a year coming from the US. The other very important initiative is the opportunity for placement students, for college students in the US to come and work in Barretstown for a summer on a placement. So they, in return for food and board and a stipend, they get to have the most incredible experience. And obviously that supports the college credits here in the US. So that's an important component of what we're trying to do here in the US.
The original camp was set up by Paul Newman in Connecticut, the Hole in the Wall camp, right? There's, I believe, one in New York State. Obviously, there are more locals, so why would families want their children to go to Ireland if they can go more local? What's the driver there?
Well, they can do both. Mm-hmm. They can do both.
Yeah.
Quite often, you'll find that the children have been to Double H's, the one in upstate New York, or Hole in the Wall gang camp. And they might have transitioned out of that camp. And then the next step for them is obviously to either not go to a serious fun camp or have the opportunity to go to an international camp. And I think if you think back to the ethos about why Paul Newman established Barretstown back in 1994, he had, as you said, set up the Hole in the Wall gang camp, and children started to travel across the Atlantic from the UK and other parts of Europe and Ireland, because the consultants could really see the really positive impact that it was having on these children. So he and his board and some of his advisors decided they needed to find a suitable location for a camp in Europe. And I think we should all be very proud as Irish people that Paul Newman received such a positive response from the Irish government, and the fact that he was given the estate, Barretstown estate, on a 90-year lease at £1 at the time from the OPW. But those children started to travel across, and culturally, I mentioned this earlier on, we have children who come from Italy and from Spain and from the US. 80% of the children are Irish children who come to Barretstown, but that 20% is that magic piece as well. And I'm never cease to amaze me when I'm in our dining hall and it's Arrivals Day, and you've got Spanish kids and you've got kids from New York and you've got kids from all over Ireland and Italy, and they sit at the table and they don't understand each other, but language is no barrier, and they end up having the best friends and go on to have pen pals and friends for life as a result of Barretstown. So it's staying true to Paul Newman's ethos of Barretstown being a centre of excellence in Europe for the Serious Fun Children's Network. And a lot of time as well, we'll find that staff for the camps in the US will train in Barretstown. That the training is exceptional that the staff receive in Barretstown, and then they will go on and work at other Serious Fun camps as well. So we would work very closely with Serious Fun.
You mentioned early on the idea of the network, not the Serious Fun network, but the network of people and resources you draw on. That topic comes up a lot here on Irish Stew, the power of networking, and particularly networking within the diaspora. Is the diaspora a source of strength for you? Is there more you can do in that area?
Oh, there definitely is. We call it friend raising when we're here in New York, and we're very fortunate. We've established now a fabulous advisory council led by Tony Dunn, who's the country manager here for Bank of Ireland. And I guess we're not naive. We know that there are an awful lot of other Irish charities knocking on the same doors and looking for funds to support initiatives that are running back at home. But for us, we've got a small target. We're not trying to take over the world here in New York. Our aim is to raise $500,000 a year here in the US to fund those children to come to Barretstown, and building up a network and building up friends. I can remember when my colleague Tim and I first came to New York, we were meeting with small groups of people who in those days were the original supporters of Paul Newman. They were his American friends. And then they opened some doors for us and introduced us to some new people. So we like to run smaller, more intimate events where we're gathering a network of friends, which is how I met you, John.
Exactly.
Just coming along to these events and to lend their support. And for us, it's always about, look, if you feel you can help us, or if you know someone else who can help us, in any way, please. So one of our advisory council members at the moment has helped us with university engagement around the placement students. That's absolutely brilliant, because the more placement students we have in Barretstown, obviously our overhead costs come down. So that's a fantastic initiative. Kevin, as I mentioned, from Memorial Sloan Kettering, has been sending the children to Barretstown, and he's a great ambassador here and has spoken at a number of events for us. So it's just about doing things right and doing things properly and slowly and building up the long game, building up that network, not coming in and running the big event. That is a big risk and takes a lot of management and maybe for very little return.
Crowded schedule.
Yes.
You had mentioned Tony Dunn as his role here for Barretstown, and he's someone who's always done us a good favor, and many of the organizations in New York find an important second home here at the Bank of Ireland, which is where we are now.
Just a quick programming note. At this point in our conversation, we asked Tony Dunn of the Bank of Ireland to join. Tony is the U.S. country manager for the bank. So when you hear another voice in the room, that'll be Tony. And so, now, back to the episode.
Tony, what drew you into this work, and what do you see in the future for Barretstown's work in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I'd known Barretstown before from Ireland. First connection was it when I went to pick up my sister, who was a volunteer at Barretstown. So that was the first time I ever got to know it. And then I knew about it and all the rest. And then when I came to the US, I'm here 14 years now. And over that time, I've got to know a lot, and I've worked with a lot of the charities and organizations. But then it was the consul at the time, it was Kieran Madden, asked if I would meet with Dee. And basically they started off just saying they needed some space, actually, and that's where it started. So over that time I got to know Dee, and then I actually got to know Barretstown more. And one, I was impressed with obviously what Barretstown do, but I was very impressed with the governance. And that was a big thing for me. I've been asked to join a lot of boards, be on a lot of things. Sometimes is it me or is it the Bank of Ireland connection? Not fully sure, but I've always been hesitant to do it. Because when you become a board member, you take on a lot of personal risk. And if anything goes bad, you have your name associated with it. And also, I'm conscious that I've got Bank of Ireland's name associated with it. But I got to know Barretstown really well. As I say, I got to know what Barretstown's doing. I got to know the governance behind it. I got to know the model. And then as I talked to Dee and Tim more and more, I got to understand what they were looking to do in the US. And I fully bought into it, and I agreed with their approach.
Let's go here, governance, because Dee, I know you mentioned it earlier, and Tony's just mentioned it now. Barretstown is the custodian of people's hard-earned money. How do you assuage concerns? Is this just about transparency? Is this just about putting up your financials on a website so people can pull it down? Or what is needed to get people into a comfort zone so they're willing to open up their checkbook in a meaningful way? Although people don't open up checkbooks anymore, I think.
We're still happy when they do open up checkbooks, don't get us wrong.
Yeah, so on that score, yes, of course we do our annual report and accounts, and it's no accident that we've won the Publisher Accounts Awards for the last number of years. But governance is so important to us that when we're speaking to somebody new and we're introducing Barretstown, the first thing that we're doing is we're talking about governance. And we're talking about the governance structures that we have in place, our governance framework. We talk about our board, we talk about our standing committees, we talk about our responsibility, accountability and transparency in everything we do. And I think the reason our Published Accounts Awards have won over the last number of years is because we set out clearly how we use donors' funds and how they are used to support Barretstown delivering its impact for more and more children and families. And I also, when we're speaking to new organisations or new friends of Barretstown, as they're called, we spend a lot of time talking about our strategy. So we've got a strategic plan in place now, a 2028 strategic plan, which clearly articulates what our growth is going to be, the impact that we're going to have over the next number of years, the funds that we're going to need to be able to raise to make that a reality. So we do an awful lot of that background sharing of information about Barretstown before we ever have a conversation with somebody about their willingness to become involved. And also being very clear with donors that if they do support us, how will that funds be used? So, for example, I think one of the beauties of Barretstown is that we're able to invite people to Barretstown. They can come and see firsthand themselves the impact that their funds are making. So they're not raising funds for something that they're never ever going to be able to tangibly touch or see or feel by coming to Barretstown. And we would have a lot of our corporate partners will come down and they'll volunteer at camps and they'll see firsthand just how professional Barretstown is. But they'll also see the impact that those funds are having on the children who are there during that time.
The transparency point is very important, and I like that to be able to say if we raise X amount, this is what your money is going to. And to bring one child over from America to Ireland, there's no cost to it, to the child, to the family, but the impact it does to not just that child but to their whole family and everything is invaluable. But so being able to say it to somebody who is interested in getting involved in Barretstown, supporting Barretstown, this is what your money is going to do and this is how your money is going to change somebody's life, is a very easy and transparent message.
That's coming from a banker. If I was looking at those sheets, I'm not sure I would come up with as strong a conclusion, but you know what you're looking at here.
Yeah, from a governance perspective, I do. You know what I mean? This is what we deal with. And as I said, that's why I got comfortable with it. And yeah, it's important that you've trust in Dee, you've got trust in the board, but not just in Dee and the board, you've got trust in the whole apparatus that surrounds Barretstown that makes sure that, as you mentioned the word custodian, and that's what you are. When somebody gives money to Barretstown Foundation USA, we are a custodian of that money in that bank account to make sure it's doing the right thing. And the right thing is there to help children who have their lives being devastated by sickness, but not just the children, their family too. And that's one of the things I think about when we look at the fundraising model we have in the US. Dee might have mentioned this, that we're trying to go at it a slightly different way. What we feel is that we need to get the word of Barretstown out there. If we introduce people to Barretstown, we're pushing at an open door. So for us, it's about, there's many competing and really good organisations, and people have a huge amount of options where they can give their money and do really good. We think Barretstown is one of those. So we just need to get the word out there at Barretstown. We need to make sure that we're introducing people to Barretstown. And once, if they come and visit the camp, or if they meet a family whose lives have been fundamentally turned around because of the great work that's done at Barretstown, I think it's a brilliant message.
Tony, we asked a similar question of Dee. Is there a human story that you think of when you think of Barretstown that really hits you and sticks with you?
Yeah, over the years I've been involved in Barretstown. I've been to Barretstown a few times, but I've also met families who have been through it. And then you meet somebody, but even in New York, it's a very small Irish American community. And the amount of people I meet who go, oh, my niece or nephew, or my neighbour, or no matter what, there is somebody who knows somebody whose life has been touched by Barretstown. I think that's brilliant. And I do think whenever we have an event here, I'm always pushing Dee, we need to get first-hand voices from people who've been experienced it. So at the last event we did, we had a family who spoke about it, and just a mother and a daughter explaining what was the impact of their time in Barretstown and how it's helped them and how it's changed them.
I think a lot of times on the podcast we talk about the power of narrative and how that changes things. I guess what's a unique challenge to some degree is we were dealing with an Irish charitable organisation setting up shop, so to speak, and that's probably the wrong term, in New York City. And as you pointed out, there are competing charities operating in that. And I think you answered that question to some degree, Dee, because you said, hey, we have American children and their families going to Barretstown. We have students going to Barretstown in a voluntary capacity. Seems to me you've ticked the boxes and made the case very persuasive for American donors to contribute to Barretstown, USA, because that's a great plan. And as we pointed out, we're putting a $500,000 target, I believe, this year. Is that correct?
That's the aim, to get there.
Yeah.
To get that funding done. So, all that said, talk to me about the organization globally in terms of, let's say, geographically where the funding comes from, right? So we have obviously this US effort that you're doing right now, but there's probably a broader picture.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on that 80% of the children who come to Barretstown are Irish, and that's predominantly where the funds are raised in Ireland. We have obviously our fundraising efforts here in the US. We're trying to copy this model now in the UK. So we've Barretstown UK, we have a board in the UK as well, just getting off the ground and trying to do similar work. And then where the children come from, countries like Italy and Spain, they're funded by parent organisations in their country. Obviously we don't want to be spending money on the costs of flights and everything else, so we work with those organisations who cover the costs of those children coming to Barretstown, so that's not a cost to Barretstown.
Now, a lot of times you will hear, especially this time of year, the issue of donor fatigue. And I'm kind of going to ask this question in an Irish context in a way, because years ago, I don't know if you remember Live Aid, which was this enormous fundraising effort for Ethiopian famine relief, and it was of course organised by Bob Geldof. I was struck at the time as a 21-year-old that Ireland gave way more money per capita than any other country in the world. Now, it might be the fact that Bob Geldof was running it, but it was an astonishing thing. So talk to us a little bit about charitable giving in Ireland, and have you drawn any conclusions when comparing it to America? How do those two things vary in the mindsets?
Irish people are incredibly generous, and you're quite right. And Christmas time is a very busy time for many Irish charities, and that's why we are currently running our own Christmas campaign. I think in the US it's much more considered part of your salary or your income. You've got the opportunity to do payroll giving. We don't have that in Ireland, so that's definitely one big difference. And I think it's something that the Irish model could look to the US in this regard. But I think it's about coming back to the point, Martin, you were raising earlier on about being compelling and what is the difference that the funds are going to make. And I think that's very important for Barretstown. And our Christmas campaign at the moment features a young girl who, because of her cancer treatment, lost her vision in one of her eyes. And just the difference she talks, the camper herself talks in her campaign and talks about the importance of Barretstown.
I think, but back to your point, the difference between Ireland and, say, the US, I think philanthropy is much more developed and in the US than it is in Ireland. And there's numerous reasons for that. I'd say one is, Dee mentioned it, payroll deductions, company matching, and all the rest is way more developed here. But secondly, the tax deductibility of it is very favourable over here in the US. And so therefore it makes sense, you know what I mean? It actually, from a tax point of view, it absolutely makes sense. And that's why so many Irish organisations are over here trying to tap into that and trying to make sure that they can, through their US arm, help. I think the wrong thing to do is be a fly-by-night, just drop in once a year and then never be seen again. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to build a community that will support Barretstown, that will spread the word of Barretstown. And therefore, it's a long-term play that we will build this up over a number of years. And we're trying to do something like at every event. We're trying to make sure that we have 50-60% of different people at every event, and therefore building the community and spreading the word.
We're coming to the point in the program. We're going to drive towards the finish line here, and I can't remember, Dee, if I mentioned our Seamus plug at the end, where our guest gets a chance to plug away and direct our listeners to do something or know something more that you would like them to know. And I have a feeling where we're going with this, but what would be your Seamus plug? And Tony, you're happy to join in too.
Yeah, so my plug would be to ask your listeners to please think about Barretstown and to log on to our website, barretstown.org. There's many ways in which they can get involved at Barretstown, and they themselves may not be able to help, but I think the important message is that they may know somebody who's able to help. And if you hear about a Barretstown event happening here in New York in 2025, consider coming along and learning more about the organisation, because we're always looking for new friends at Barretstown.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, as I always say, I think when people hear about Barretstown, then we're pushing at an open door. When they hear about the excellent work we do and how we change somebody's family, we're pushing at the open door. So we need to spread that word. We need to build a community, make more friends. And so if people are anyway interested, contact me, contact Dee, contact Sophie Colgan. go to the website and absolutely come along to our events in 2025.
And there's an open invitation to any of your listeners to come and visit Barretstown in 2025.
We do have plans to go traveling again. We will be putting out a series shortly on our first travel trip to Belfast, and we do have on our schedule to do a Midlands trip sometime next year.
You're very welcome. We have a fantastic
We'll be
studio.
delighted.
During COVID-19, we obviously had to make that very difficult decision about closing the gates of Barretstown because the country went into lockdown, and I can remember at the time having conversations with lots of parents saying, look, we feel very safe in Barretstown, can we please come? But unfortunately they couldn't, so we had to find a way to bring our programs into their homes, and we built a studio in Barretstown and we introduced Barretstown Live. So every Saturday morning we broadcast into the kitchens and the homes of up to 25 families. So as a result of that, I mentioned earlier on that the Spanish children who come to Barretstown are funded by an organisation in Spain, and because they weren't sending Spanish children, they were very impressed that we were able to broadcast live from our makeshift studio, that they funded the development of a studio at Barretstown. So we have a fully functioning studio. So the most perfect location for you to come and do a podcast in Ireland, and you'd be very welcome.
Well, we will look forward to that, and so on behalf of our listeners and John and myself, we'd like to thank Dee Ahearn and Tony Dunn of Bank of Ireland for hosting us, and Dee for giving us a deeper insight into what makes a world-class charitable organization tick in the best possible way.
Well, I hope our listeners agree Barretstown does sound like a magical place, and as its CEO, Dee Ahearn, relates, it's expanding its good work globally and expanding its message to the United States. And I think Tony Dunn, who was able to join us, really helps underscore the message. It's kind of a third-party endorsement of the good governance that Barretstown operates under. So when you give to Barretstown, you are assured the money is going to a good place and going for the benefit of some very deserving kids.
Yeah, I was delighted, John, to have the opportunity to speak to both Dee and to Tony Dunn and get a better understanding of Barretstown. And I'm reminded, of course, we're in the middle of December right now, and it's a season of giving. Some of us are fortunate, and I'm at a certain stage in life where I actually don't need more stuff. And so I'm always delighted when somebody opts not to give me a thing, rather make a donation, maybe attach my name to it for a cause that is worthy. And I can't imagine a more worthy cause than Barretstown. So to conclude the podcast, I will again wish all our listeners a very happy and healthy holiday season, or Oscoelga Nullig Chonaguit. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.